Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a world of flickering lanterns, warm herb-scented shadows, and little wooden drawers labeled in Latin. You're stepping into a medieval French apothecary barely wider than a stable packed floor to ceiling with jars, dried bundles, and things that may or may not still be alive. Outside, the cobblestones are slick with last night's rain. Inside, everything smells faintly of lavender beeswax and something a little more pungent, which you later realize is pickled ox bile. This is not the bustling glamour of royal courts or the drama of knights and kings. No, this is the quieter world, the one tucked behind wooden shutters and beneath slanted rooftops where potions are stirred slowly and lives are mended just a little at a time. Welcome to the workshop of a medieval apothecary. And fair warning, if you're expecting glamour or eternal youth, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, leave a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is, wherever you are. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You duck through the narrow wooden door as the smell hits you. First herbs crushed underfoot, oil of cloves clinging to the air. Every surface in this place is doing something. The shelves are sagging under the weight of clay pots and glass bottles. The mortar and pestle on the table has clearly just finished grinding something tough and fragrant. Even the ceiling beams are working overtime, supporting bundles of drying plants that rustle when you pass underneath. There is no counter, no neat checkout, just a long table cluttered with handwritten lists, half-filled jars, and a tiny bird skull you decide not to ask about. This is a place where the line between medicine and mystery hasn't quite been drawn yet. You move deeper inside. Lantern light flickers across a dusty tapestry. St. Cosmas and Damien, patron saints of medicine, gaze down at you with unsettlingly blank expressions. In one corner, a cat sleeps next to a small heap of dried sage. In another, a stool leans on three legs like it's trying to give up. Your hands brush over a jar of something soft and petal-like. Rose petals dried and pressed flat. A staple for cooling inflammation or just making things smell a little less like sheep guts. Here's something people often forget. Apothecaries weren't just mixing medicine. They were lighting funeral incense, preparing scented sachets for noble women's underclothes, brewing love potions for lonely widows, and minty oil for breath that could kill a marriage. You spot a tinier, dimmer room beyond the curtain, no doubt the storage chamber. No one but the master goes in there. That's where the expensive stuff lives. Saffron threads kept in wax-sealed packets, powdered unicorn horn, okay, narwhal tusk, but don't ruin the illusion. Maybe even a bit of mummy dust scraped from a real Egyptian relic, because yes, people absolutely rubbed ground-up human remains on their gouty feet. You kneel beside the work table. There's a dried lizard stuck to a card labeled Lacerda. You're not sure if it's meant to be medicine, a label, or a warning. The cat lifts its head, sniffs, and goes back to sleep. Here's your first historical anchor. By the 13th century, apothecaries in France were officially recognized as separate from physicians and surgeons. They weren't supposed to diagnose, just to prepare and dispense. Of course, in practice, people asked you everything, and if you were smart, you gave them something. Even if it was just sugared thyme in a fancy jar with a Latin label. Placebos were an art. You hear the bell on the door jingle. Someone's entered. A nun carrying a basket lined with linen. She doesn't speak, just sets it down on the counter and gives you a look that says, you know the usual. You nod. elderflower syrup, comfrey salve, something for Sister Annette's headaches, which are definitely stress and not spirits, despite what Father George insists. You make a mental note to refill the willow bark. It's almost gone again. Medieval aspirin, more or less bitter and a bit dangerous if overused, but what isn't? As the nun leaves, you catch your reflection in the blown glass window. You look tired, not surprising. Apothecaries rise before dawn and sleep after the city goes dark. There's no such thing as a day off, when people might show up bleeding, possessed, or demanding an antidote for that thing my cousin accidentally swallowed. You find a moment to sip something from the chipped cup near the workbench. Cold barley tea, still sweet from the licorice root. You don't mind the chill. In fact, most apothecaries believe certain medicines work better when drunk, tepid hot liquids excite the humors, or so the old texts say. Historians still argue whether the theory of humors actually helped people or just helped keep the labels sounding official. The cat hops up on the windowsill and watches a pigeon as if deciding whether or not to revolutionize dinner. Outside, the bell tower rings once. Late afternoon. You glance at the long wooden spoon resting in the vinegar barrel and wonder if it's time to stir the bleeding remedy again. It's red wine, sage, rose water, and just a pinch of dragon's blood. No, not real dragon, but a bright red resin scraped from tree bark. A little drama goes a long way in healing. Behind you, the door creaks again. A child this time, bare feet, tangled hair coins clutched in one hand. The cough gives away the request before they say a word. You reach for the licorice and hyssop without being asked. You lean over the table, scraping a little extra licorice into the pestle, just enough to sweeten the hyssop. The child is watching you with that expression all medieval children seem to wear, half awe, half suspicion, and a little hunger. You offer them the corner of a biscuit someone left behind last week. They take it without blinking. You hand over the wrapped pouch with gentle instructions. Boil in goat's milk, strain it, sip it warm. Not too fast, you add. It works better if you wait between sips. Is that true? Maybe, maybe not. But it buys time and rest. And half of healing is just getting someone to stop moving long enough for nature to catch up. The child runs off into the alley without a word. You wipe your hands on your apron and glance at the parchment list pinned above the table, names, conditions, quantities. A butcher's wife wants more stomach powder. The cobbler is requesting your special ointment again, which you strongly suspect he's been using as hair pomade. And an old man has left a rather confident note saying he expects a remedy for deafness by tomorrow, in Latin. This is where it gets interesting, because tonight you're going to learn what separates you, the apothecary, from every other so-called healer around here. You are not a physician. Those men wear black robes, speak terrible Greek, and charge triple your fee to do half your job. Physicians deal in theory. They talk about humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and debate whether a patient's melancholy is due to Saturn's position or a damp spleen. Some are brilliant, most are pretentious. You are also not a surgeon. Surgeons are blood-stained men with strong arms and short tempers who carry saws in leather rolls and are usually half drunk before noon. They handle boils, broken limbs, and battlefield leftovers. They're useful, but they smell like old onions and never wash their aprons. And you are certainly not a barber. Barbers are everywhere. They cut hair, pull teeth, let blood, and sharpen their razors on the same strap they use for everything else. People trust them because they're cheap. You do not trust them because they once put goose fat in a poultice and called it alchemy. No, you are an apothecary, a member of a quiet, stubbornly independent trade, You mix, measure, distill, powder, and preserve. Your world is built on balance between ingredients, between temperature and texture, between what the texts say and what actually seems to work. You are not flashy, but you are precise. And unlike those other professions, you work with your hands every single day. No lounging behind tapestries or dictating to students. You scrub your own tools. You grind your own seeds. And if someone poisons a well, you are the one they send for. Now, technically speaking, you are supposed to operate under the guidance of a physician. That's the rule. In practice, most physicians don't have the patience to figure out how many drops of oil of wormwood go into a fever tonic. They leave it to you, which is fine until they blame you when someone's stomach turns purple. Some apothecaries, especially in the larger towns like Paris or Lyon, are rich enough to own their own shops. Their names are etched in wood above the door. They wear fur-lined robes in winter, and they dine with the mayor's steward. Others, like you, live above the workshop, sleep beside the jars, and keep a knife under the pillow. You'd be surprised how many people try to steal valerian root when the moon is full. Across the street, a man in a crimson tunic is pointing at your shop while talking to a friend. You recognize him. That's Bertrand, an assistant to one of the city physicians. He's always glancing inside like he's counting your customers. He has a fondness for snide comments about amateur medicine. You once caught him sniffing your open window like a jealous raccoon. Historians still argue, as they say, whether apothecaries were loved or merely tolerated. In reality, it depended on the week. If your syrup cured the mayor's gout, you were a miracle worker. If the mayor choked on a clove, you were a witch. There's a knock at the rear door. You freeze. Only two types of people come to the back entrance: nobles who want something embarrassing, or peasants who can't afford to pay. You open it slowly and find a veiled woman holding a bundle in linen. She doesn't speak, just lays the bundle on your work table and backs away. Inside is a baby, barely breathing, pale as milk. A note reads, "If you can help her, do." You don't hesitate. You grab rosemary oil, a pinch of myrrh, and the smallest amount of frankincense tincture, dangerous if overdone, but excellent for breathing. You warm water, crush leaves, and whisper over the pot. Not magic, habit. You learned from an old woman who used to murmur to her soups. The baby starts to cry, loud, wet, furious. You smile just a little. Behind you, the wind shifts. A curtain flutters. The cat disappears under the table. You wrap the baby again and wait. Someone will return. They always do. Later, you sit by the window and sip the last of your barley tea. The sky is that faint medieval gray blue that never quite becomes daylight. You roll your shoulders, flex your fingers, and clean your mortar for the 100th time. You're not a doctor, not a surgeon, not a barber. You're something older, quieter, essential. Morning begins before the sun even considers waking. You're already on your knees, fumbling through straw baskets in the back room, trying to find the fennel seeds that always migrate to the bottom. Your fingers are sticky with dried honey from yesterday's poultice, and your hair smells faintly like burnt sage and something sulfurous you refuse to identify. Your first task of the day isn't glamorous. No philosopher's stones, no golden elixirs, just the reliable rhythm of the mortar and pestle. You grind until your shoulders ache and your thoughts drift elsewhere. Fennel, licorice, crushed rose hips. The sound is soothing, a soft scrape like distant waves on stone. The cat has claimed the warm spot under the table again, flicking its tail every time you shift. Once the powders are mixed and jarred, you pack your satchel for market. You go every third morning, rain or shine or plague warning. It's not for pleasure, it's for ingredients, and maybe a little gossip if the butcher's wife is in a talkative mood. The walk there is uneventful mud chickens, someone loudly hawking fish you'd rather not identify. The market square is a mess of carts and voices and smells. Everything is louder than it needs to be, and at least 3 musicians are playing 3 different songs. You pass the spice merchant, nod politely to the gravedigger, who is picking over apples curiously, and head straight for the herb stalls. Your favorite vendor is already arguing with a miller over the price of dried nettle. She spots you and lifts a handful of thyme with a wink. "Still want the eel oil?" she asks. You sigh. "If it doesn't smell worse than last week's." It does. You buy it anyway. Eel oil, by the way, is one of those fringe remedies that somehow keeps getting requested. Useful for dry skin, supposedly good for earaches, and absolutely terrible to get out of linens. Some say it was once used in love potions. You're not sure whether to believe that or not, but it's fun to imagine someone seducing a duke while reeking of river slime. Among the goods you gather today, crushed pearls for whitening teeth, fennel root, powdered ginger, a suspiciously yellow mushroom, and a small vial of what the seller promises is dragon's breath. You suspect it's sulfur mixed with clove, but hey, branding is half the battle. You also barter for 2 rare items. One is a tightly sealed bottle of rosewater from Syria, pale and clean, and worth more than your best boots. The second is a bundle of mandrake roots, scarce, oddly shaped, and wrapped like it's been smuggled out of a bishop's cellar. Now, mandrake is the sort of thing that gets talked about in whispers. It looks a bit like a person, if that person were unfortunate, shriveled, and smelled like turnips left too long in the sun. It's said to scream when pulled from the earth, though most apothecaries agree it just makes a rude squelch. Still, people love a good myth, and they love buying mystery. So you display it behind glass next to the oddly luminous honeycomb and the cracked vial labeled Essence of Moonlight. Spoiler, it's just dew collected at midnight, but no one needs to know that. Once your satchel is stuffed to the point of bulging, and you've narrowly avoided stepping in something that was definitely alive 5 minutes ago, you make your way back. The cobbled alleys are warmer now, the sky softening to a muddy gold. You pass the baker's boy balancing a tray of burnt crusts. He grins at you. He knows you'll take the ones with poppy seeds. Back in the shop, you unload everything like a magician revealing a trick. The table is soon buried under tiny bags, bundled herbs, and glass vials still sweating from the cold morning air. The cat investigates the mandrake and hisses. You set it on the highest shelf. Before anything else, you make tea. A calming blend, lemon balm, mint, a hint of lavender. Apothecaries drink more tea than nobles drink wine. It's one of the few perks of the job. That and the ability to quietly judge everyone else's health by the color of their fingernails. While sipping, you take stock. Your inventory book is a mess, ink smudged and written in at least 3 different hands. Some of the margins contain small doodles. Someone drew a dancing bear beside the entry for juniper berries. You suspect your last apprentice, the one who swore bees could smell sin. You try to clean the eel oil jar, but succeed only in spreading the stink around. The cat leaves the room, probably wise. The rest of your day unfolds slowly. A monk stops in for stomach powder. A nervous young man asks for something to improve conversation, which you translate as a mildly relaxing tincture with a hint of rose oil. He walks out smiling. He'll probably try poetry now. Poor soul. You tuck the pearl powder into its tiny shelf cubby, just beside the wormwood extract. That's a shelf you call the danger pretty section. Beautiful things that will absolutely ruin someone if used wrong. You once watched a noblewoman apply belladonna to her eyes to make her pupils wide and dreamy. She looked radiant for about 3 hours until the vomiting began. Historians still argue whether these market preparations were more placebo than cure, but you've seen too many people walk in wheezing and walk out relieved to dismiss it all as superstition. Maybe the remedy works. Maybe the ritual does, maybe both. Late in the day, a tiny bell rings above the door. A little girl enters holding a coin in her fist and a note from her grandmother. You recognize the handwriting. It curls like flower stems. You prepare a small jar of clove-infused honey and slip in a sugar-dusted licorice root. It's not part of the treatment, but it helps. As she leaves, you return to the mortar and begin grinding mandrake for a poultice, slowly, methodically. The scraping sound fills the room again. You're already looking forward to tomorrow. The key is iron, worn smooth at the edges from generations of nervous fingers. You keep it on a leather cord beneath your robe close to the skin, just in case someone ever tries to sneak in and get clever while you're dozing behind the counter. The key only fits one lock in the entire shop. Not the door, not the drawer where you keep the coin box. No, this one unlocks the cupboard. The cupboard is ordinary-looking dark wood. 3 panels, hinges so old they creak, even when you think about opening them. It's mounted on the back wall high enough that children can't reach, and low enough that elders don't have to ask for a ladder. There's no carving, no gilding, no sign of what's inside, but it is without question the heart of your apothecary. It holds what you don't sell on market days, what you don't show to just anyone, what might be completely useless or slightly illegal, depending on who's asking and what mood the bishop is in. You check the shop, no visitors, no apprentices stirring trouble. The cat is asleep in a pile of nettle leaves again, dreaming of mice or maybe vengeance. You untuck the key from under your robe and quietly, reverently unlock the cupboard. The inside smells like wax lavender and a trace of something metallic. You open it slowly, not because you're being dramatic, though yes, you are a little, but because one of the vials inside tends to rattle ominously when you move too fast. Inside 7 shelves. Each is a little disorganized, a little dusty, but meticulously memorized. Top shelf, volatile oils, wormwood, camphor, turpentine, and something labeled essence of sorrow that you keep for sentimental reasons but haven't touched in years. Second shelf, preserved oddities, a desiccated frog stitched with silver thread, a phial of red dust labeled Rex Lapidum, King of Stones. No one knows what that means, and you're afraid to ask. A little cloth bundle that rustles when shaken, though you've never dared unwrap it. Third shelf, the powders. Calomel, crushed antler bone, ash, ground oyster shell. Here's where it gets tricky. The difference between a miracle and a funeral, usually a single pinch. You remember an apprentice who once confused chalk dust with white lead. She's a scribe now, safer for everyone. Fourth shelf, tokens and teeth. A bezoar stone, probably fake, definitely impressive. A string of dried wolf teeth. A sachet of what you tell everyone is basil, but secretly you're not sure. It smells like basil, but also like grave dirt. The bottom shelves are for the real rarities imported, spices, sealed syrups, powdered mummies. Yes, actual powdered mummy imported from Egypt, expensive enough to bankrupt a fisherman. Used sparingly, usually in potions for the rich who think Egyptian dust holds more mystery than French earth. It probably doesn't. But again, branding. This cupboard isn't about danger, not really, it's about status. Apothecaries who own cupboards like this don't need to shout in the marketplace or scribble Latin on every jar. Their authority is implied, floating through the room like cinnamon smoke. Some of the contents here wouldn't pass a guild inspection. Not because they're dangerous, though, let's be honest. They are, but because guildmasters dislike anything that suggests apothecaries might know more than physicians. It's a quiet war fought with footnotes and guild charters, and occasionally a well-timed rumor about someone's leeches getting loose in a chapel. Historians still argue whether these cabinets functioned more as practical storage or performative theater. The answer is probably yes. You close the door, lock it again, and tuck the key back under your collar. The room feels heavier now, like the cupboard's secrets are still lingering in the air. You pour yourself a bit of cooled wine from the clay jug under the table. It tastes slightly of rosemary. You're not sure whether that's a flaw or a bonus. As the day continues, customers drift in and out. You never open the cupboard while someone's watching. That would be vulgar. It's not a treasure chest. It's a threshold. A boy comes in asking for something to make his sister stop crying. You hand him a small sachet of chamomile, laced with just enough honey to make it palatable. You also hand him a second one identical in every way and tell him it's for him. So you don't forget to be kind, you say. He nods solemnly like you've just handed him a dragon scale. Later, a wealthy widow visits. She wants something rare, something subtle, something that works on the mind. You consider offering her rosemary wine, but no, she wants mystery. You retreat to the cupboard, pick the vial of clove saffron syrup, and relabel it Nocturne. She pays double. Once, years ago, a merchant accused you of selling superstition. You invited him into your back room, pointed at the cupboard, and asked which shelf he'd like a demonstration from. He left in silence. You're still not sure whether he was impressed or afraid. Probably both. As the sun lowers and the shadows stretch, you polish the wood of the cupboard with a cloth soaked in vinegar and lavender oil. A ritual, half habit, half charm. Some say lavender protects against envy. Others say it just smells nice. Either way, it keeps your fingers busy. Outside, bells chime, evening prayers. Inside, your cupboard keeps its peace. And you keep its key. It starts the way most apprenticeships do, badly. You are 12, maybe 13. No one's quite sure, including your parents. You're too thin, too quiet, and too fond of sniffing wildflowers to become a butcher. And so, by the logic of medieval career counseling, you are handed over to the local apothecary. He eyes you like a suspicious jar of old brine. "Can you read?" he asks. You nod. "In Latin." You shake your head. He sighs. "You'll learn, or die from drinking the wrong bottle." It's a warm welcome, really. Your first 6 months are not glamorous. You scrub floors. You stir vinegar until your hands prune. You sort dried herbs by scent texture and whether or not they make you sneeze. You grind chalk until your knuckles crack, then regrind it because it's still too lumpy. You carry buckets of water. You burn your fingers on copper pots. You learn the difference between marjoram and mint by taste, and between cinnamon and cassia by getting yelled at. You also learn to keep track of toads. There are toads, you see, in jars, dried, pickled, powdered. One is stuffed with saffron and hung over the door for protection, though from what no one says. Another lives in a wine bottle filled with vinegar and salt. This one is apparently for warding off headaches. You ask once whether the toads are actually medicinal or just decorative. The master says yes. There's a test every so often. Not a formal one, just sudden questions when you're least prepared. Like, what do you give a nobleman with swollen ankles and red cheeks, or how do you make someone vomit politely? The answer to that one, by the way, is a syrup of ipecac and honey with a clean cloth nearby. You sleep in the corner of the workshop. Your bed is a straw mattress that always smells faintly of mustard seeds. At night you read the shop's only book of recipes by candlelight, whispering the Latin words aloud so they'll stick in your mouth by morning. One night the master catches you doing this. He watches, then grunts, then says, "That one's wrong." You look up. "Peppermint won't ease melancholy," he mutters. "Too bright. Try marjoram or boiled pear if you're feeling generous." He walks away. That's the nicest thing he said to you in weeks. Apprenticeship is 6 years, give or take. Some stretch longer, especially if your master is picky or forgets you exist. You learn everything by doing, or by bleeding. Once you slice your hand on a cracked jar and spend the afternoon trying to wrap it with one hand while the cat stares unhelpfully. Another time you mistake gentian root for angelica and cause a baker's wife to faint halfway through Mass. You spend the next 2 days delivering apologies and jam. You don't just learn recipes, you learn rhythms. How long to stir saffron before it blooms. When to cover a boiling decoction so it doesn't lose its spirit. How to tell whether a tincture has gone foul. Hint if the cat won't sniff it. Don't drink it. You memorize colors, smells, textures. You develop a sixth sense for when something is about to explode, usually right before it stains the ceiling. There's a day, maybe 3 years in, when the master lets you label a jar, just one. It's rosemary vinegar. You dip the quill, write the Latin blow on it to dry. You feel like a scholar. Historians still argue whether apprenticeships were fair systems of education or just a socially sanctioned form of child labor. The truth probably falls somewhere between yes, you learn valuable skills, but also your spine may never recover from hauling 80-pound barrels of syrup up narrow ladders. You take a test eventually. An oral exam in front of 3 guild members who look like they've been sucking lemons for most of their lives. They ask questions you've heard before and some you haven't. One asks what you'd give a man for poisoned mushrooms. Another wants you to identify 6 dried roots by touch. You pass, barely. And then something strange happens. The master hands you a fresh apron. Not clean, nothing in this shop is truly clean, but unworn. No stains, no missing ties. "You're not entirely useless," he says. This in apothecary language is a declaration of love. You get your own set of tools, a pestle, a spoon with a twisted handle, a folding knife that locks into place. Your name is carved into the back of a shelf, small neat next to the burn marks from where the second apprentice once lit the time drawer on fire. You are no longer an apprentice. You are the apothecary, or at least the one people see when the master is sleeping sick or sulking about an overdue shipment of clove. Your first solo prescription is for a young man with a red rash and too much perfume. You give him lavender water and warn him to stop borrowing his aunt's cosmetics. He looks offended, but he comes back a week later, rash gone, grateful. You even get tipped. It's not a rich life, it's not an easy one, but it's yours now. And it begins in that drafty little corner beside the nettle bundles and the sleeping cat where you learned to mix powders and remember Latin and not cry when the wormwood hits your nose like a brick. And where, if you're lucky, the next apprentice will scream a little less than you did when the pickled toad falls off the shelf. Smell rules everything here. Before words, before reason, before even the sight of a customer's expression, there's the scent. It slips into the shop before they do. A whiff of damp wool and fear, or clove-stuffed boots and prate, or occasionally that very specific sour combination that means someone's been applying vinegar to a wound and it's absolutely not working. Your nose becomes your first diagnostic tool. It's more reliable than their memory, more honest than their words. They'll tell you their stomach hurts, but their breath whispers too much garlic, not enough chewing, and possibly a little unspoken guilt. Today, you light a small charcoal disc in the brass burner by the door. On it, a pinch of crushed lavender and frankincense. The smoke curls upward, slow and elegant, like it has secrets. It's not just for mood, it's a line of defense. Medieval medicine believed foul smells carried disease. Bad air could kill you just as surely as an arrow. And so the countermeasures begin at the nose. The shop always carries its own layered perfume, lemon balm, whetstone, faint vinegar, beeswax, something spicy you can never quite place. It clings to your robe, follows you into church, and once made a bishop sneeze 3 times in a row during confession. You take it as a compliment. Certain remedies rely entirely on scent. A smelling cone packed with powdered rose petals and mint is tucked into ladies' sleeves or held beneath the nose during long sermons. For gentlemen, there's a more robust version, camphor and bay leaf stuffed in linen sachets. Everyone's pretending it's for health, but frankly, it's mostly to avoid the unwashed masses. Then there are fumigations, herbs burned in a pan beneath someone's chair to drive out humors. You once had to do this for a minor noble who insisted he was possessed by melancholy. His wife nodded vigorously in agreement. The fumes made his eyes water and his speech slur, but he declared himself cured. He even paid extra. Sometimes you're asked to scent rooms before a birth. Sage, juniper, and bay leaf, meant to purify, protect, and perhaps distract from the terrifying reality of childbirth in a medieval kitchen. And of course, there are the plague bags, small leather pouches worn around the neck stuffed with rosemary, cloves, angelica root, and anything else pungent enough to offend death's nostrils. Did they work? Historians still argue. Some say they helped deter fleas. Others say they were more psychological, a nose full of clove leaves, little room for panic. One of your favorite rituals, quiet, unspoken, and mostly for your own sanity, is the scent test. Each morning before anyone enters, you go to your shelves and open 1 jar from each corner, just a sniff. Chamomile, asafoetida, myrrh. Sometimes you add a new one, sometimes you catch yourself smiling. You keep a small book behind the counter, not the recipe book, this one is more subjective. You record scent combinations that work not just for healing, but for memory. Rose and lemon balm for calm, hyssop and vinegar for focus, frankincense and thyme for sleep. You're creating a private library, but one that lives in the air. Today, a woman enters holding her head like it's filled with wasps. She says her thoughts buzz. You nod, hand her a cloth sachet of dried basil and lavender. She breathes in, eyes fluttering closed. How does this help? She asks. You answer without thinking, because scent speaks before logic, and sometimes the body listens faster than the mind. She looks at you like you're quoting scripture. You accept the compliment. There's a fringe belief, rare now but not gone, that scents can trap spirits. That if you burn rosemary and chant the right verse, you can capture a ghost. Mid-sentence, one of your earliest apprentices tried this, convinced the attic was haunted. All she caught was a lungful of smoke and a week-long cough. But still, the story gets told. You've also been asked more than once for perfumes with less noble purposes: seduction, influence, revenge. The line between apothecary and perfumer is thin, especially after sunset. You once blended a scent called Evening Garden for a merchant's daughter. Lavender, clove, and a whisper of crushed marjoram. She claimed it made a young knight weep into his wine and write her 3 sonnets. Whether the tears were love or allergies, no one knows. There's also the curious case of the sleeping draught. That wasn't. A nobleman ordered a calming tonic for his insomniac dog. You gave him valerian root and skullcap. He returned a week later, furious. Turns out he drank it by accident. Slept 14 hours, missed a tournament. He tipped well. Your cat has his own shelf now, lined with dried valerian. You once caught him licking the jar. Now he naps next to it daily, purring like a tiny organ bellows. And then there's the opposite problem, bad smells. Not just unpleasant, but dangerous. Spoiled ointments, rotten roots, vinegar that's turned acidic in the wrong way. You develop a reflex wrinkle your nose, take a step back, check for color change. You can smell trouble faster than the cat can knock over a jar. Smell becomes your sixth sense, your guardian, your whispering friend. The bell above the door rings again. A boy comes in, face pale, lips dry. Smells like fever, you mutter. You reach for lemon balm and vinegar, a little sage, a touch of honey, and just for good measure, a drop of rose water on the cloth you'll press to his brow. He doesn't ask what's in it, he just breathes in, and you watch the color come back to his face. The sun barely crests the rooftops when the first knock comes. It's soft, hesitant. The kind of knock that says, I didn't sleep and I think I'm dying, but I'm embarrassed to admit it. You open the door anyway, still tying your robe, your hair smelling like fennel from yesterday's tinctures. It's the baker's wife. She looks exhausted, says her hands feel numb. You nod, usher her in, and set the kettle over the coals. She doesn't need medicine yet. She needs warmth, something to hold, and maybe a reason to sit still. This is how most days begin in an apothecary's life, not with drama, but with a slow, steady parade of needs. Some whispered, some wept, some shouted from the street with more mucus than dignity. You get to work. First, the monks. They always come in pairs, like ducks or judgment. Today's pair are from the nearby priory, looking sheepish, as they request more comfrey salve for Brother Henri's knees. You package it neatly, include a sachet of chamomile, and don't ask why. They also want 2 vials of rose water and a sweet-smelling syrup. Some things are between monks and heaven. Next, a widow, pale dress, tightly clutched purse. She slides you a scrap of cloth with a list in shaky handwriting. You read the words aloud: valerian, hawthorn, willow bark. Her husband died 6 months ago. Her son left town. Her legs hurt, she can't sleep, and she started talking to pigeons. You make her a blend for sleep, one for grief, and tuck in a sprig of lemon balm with a wink. She smiles, says nothing, leaves slowly. Then comes the grumpy noblewoman. She storms in like a thundercloud wearing lace, complains of headaches, claims your last remedy smelled like turnips. You smile, nod, offer her a new concoction that is in fact the same one, just in a blue jar instead of green. She pays double. You don't flinch. Some days feel like theater. You're the patient lead in 20 tiny dramas. You smile, nod, hand over hope wrapped in linen. It's not deception, it's presentation. The medicine matters, but so does the way it's delivered. And speaking of drama, here comes Gene the butcher, holding his belly and swearing he's been cursed. You know Gene. Gene drinks too much when the weather's warm and forgets to chew when the meat is cheap. You hand him a jar of dried fennel, a tin of licorice powder, and a firm instruction to eat something green this week. He nods solemnly, like you've blessed him with holy relics. Around midday, a child arrives with a dog bite and a heroic amount of dirt on his face. His mother follows, flustered. You wash the wound, apply a vinegar compress, and rub in a calendula salve. The child sniffs, glares at you, and asks if he can see the toad in the jar. You oblige. He leaves with a lollipop made from sugar and mint. Not medicinal, but morale counts. This afternoon, a merchant drops in. Thin mustache, too many rings, and a voice like he's permanently advertising something. Says he needs something strong for nerves. You ask business trouble. He laughs too hard. Wife, he whispers. You give him powdered ashwagandha and a bottle of something you labeled Serenity Elixir. It's mostly chamomile with a splash of brandy. He walks out cradling it like a newborn. Historians still argue whether medieval apothecaries truly understood the mental toll of daily life or just guessed a lot. You don't argue. You just keep handing out things that smell kind and taste like a reason to breathe. Late afternoon brings the cobbler's apprentice limping, asking if you still make the good blister balm. You nod, pull out a salve of beeswax, plantain, and marigold. He grins. Says it saved his heels during last year's pilgrimage. You don't mention it's also great for saddle sores and elbow rashes. Let the boy have his miracle. And then the artist. He never buys much, just bits of saffron and lampblack. Says he's painting saints and needs the right colors to catch heaven. You once gave him powdered beetroot and told him it was divine blush. He returned a month later and left you a tiny painting of St. Luke with a very concerned donkey. You hung it over the back shelf. The rhythm of the day never truly stops, just softens. People come with stomach aches and soul aches, sore knees and sore hearts. Some want a cure, some just want someone to listen while the kettle boils. You write prescriptions in Latin, sometimes Greek, sometimes poorly spelled French with drawings in the margins, because not everyone can read. One man requested his instructions on a biscuit. You complied. He ate the dosage mid-sentence. You never saw him again. Toward evening, you finally get a moment to yourself. You wash your hands in rose water and vinegar, sit by the back window, watch the pigeons settle along the rooftops like sleepy scholars. You take notes in your recipe book, not just the ingredients, but what people said, what worked, what didn't, what made them laugh. You draw a small doodle of a noble woman sneezing at lavender, title it Vengeance via Potpourri. You reflect just for a moment on how much has passed through your hands today. Illness, hope, fear, grief, even joy. And you did it all with dried flowers, boiling water, and a bit of clever glasswork. The cat curls up beside you. The bell above the door jangles once more. One last patient. You smile. The door creaks open and the last light of day filters in like melted gold. It catches the edges of your jars, making everything look briefly expensive. It won't last. The light, the silence, the relative peace of an almost closed shop. Because now it's time for alchemy hour, that sacred sliver between business and bed when you finally get to play with the dangerous stuff. You roll up your sleeves, tie back your hair, take a deep breath that smells like resin vinegar and just a whisper of lavender ash. Then you light the coals. There's something about metal and fire that feels ancient and precise. The other tools in your shop are gentle wooden spoons, clay pots, linen sachets. But here in your little lab corner, it's all glass, copper, and risk. Your tools await. A copper still patched twice with lead solder. A set of glass alembics, delicate bulbous smug. A mortar stained red from cochineal. And a long-handled spoon you're convinced could double as a weapon. Tonight's goal, distill essence of rosemary into something sharper, purer, maybe even a little miraculous. You're not expecting philosopher's gold. You'll settle for something that doesn't explode. You measure out dried rosemary, crumbling it between your fingers. The scent kicks upward like an argument. You add water, seal the alembic, light the coals. Wait and wait. The thing about alchemy, real or not, is that it requires boredom. The kind of focused tedium that makes you forget you have knees. You stare at the glass as it fogs, then drips. One drop, two, a slow, fragrant heartbeat. People outside think apothecaries are just herbalists with better handwriting. But here's what they don't know. You make glassware. Not all of it, of course. Some you barter for. But the finest pieces, the ones that won't betray you mid-boil, you shape yourself. There's a kiln in the back half hidden beneath sacks of barley husks. You stoke it once a week, melt sand and soda and lime, shape it with a hollow pipe and your own breath. You once burned off your eyebrows trying to make a flask for aqua vitae. They grew back, sort of. Each flask has a personality. One bubbles too enthusiastically. One always leaks from the lip. One your favorite glows faintly in the dark. Probably not healthy, but very impressive. Historians still argue whether medieval apothecaries truly practiced alchemy or just borrowed its fashion. The truth: a little of both. The boundary between chemistry and mysticism was as blurry as the bottom of your vinegar jar. You keep mercury in a locked drawer. Dangerous, seductive stuff. Silver as moonlight, heavy as regret. You don't use it often, just enough to remind yourself why caution exists. One drop too many and you're chasing hallucinations through the rafters. And yes, you've done the classic test: touch gold. Then touch mercury, watch the surface shimmer like it's dreaming. Beautiful, terrifying. You locked the jar right after. You once made verdigris by hanging copper shavings over a dish of vinegar and watching it sweat green. Took a week, smelled like betrayal, looked like emerald dust. Absolutely worth it. Some nights you make tinctures that no one asked for, just because. Like the one with crushed violets, fermented elderflower, and a dash of turpentine. You wrote "for courage" on the label. No one's dared try it, not even the cat. You also experiment with colored oils: bright blue from indigo, deep red from alkanet, golden green from St. John's wort. You layer them in clear jars like stained glass. They sit on your shelf, catching light, making customers ask, "Is that safe?" And you smile, say define safe. You once made a soap that turned someone's hands purple, permanently. In your defense, they said they wanted something dramatic. But tonight, it's just rosemary. The still hums. The glass drips slow and steady. You dip a finger into the collected distillate. Rub it under your nose. Sharp, clean, like clarity bottled and bottled again. You pour it into a thin-necked vial, stopper it with wax, and write in your cleanest script, "Clarity second pressing." You place it beside your first attempt. The labels match. The scent doesn't. Improvement. As you clean up, the tools feel heavier than before, not just with use, but with memory. The cracked alembic from the night you tried to distill onion juice. The flask that fizzed with too much mint. The mortar that once absorbed a drop of mercury and now sits on a shelf marked "decorative only." You scrub the copper with vinegar and salt. You wipe the glass with linen dipped in rose water. You whisper a blessing to the tools, not out loud, not exactly, but something your hands remember. Alchemy isn't magic. It's pattern, discipline, a stubborn kind of hope. You hang your apron by the fire. Your hands smell like rosemary and metal. Your eyebrows thankfully remain intact. The cat sneaks in, eyes glowing, and settles near the warm glass. Outside, the moon is rising, pulling silver over the rooftops. Inside, your shop glows faintly like something sacred. You snuff the lamp, close the shutters. Tomorrow, you'll try again. You wake before the birds again. There's no alarm in your life except the low creak of beams and the way the air changes just before dawn, cooler, stiller, carrying the scent of last night's fire and something faintly herbal from the drying rack overhead. You sit up, stretch, and immediately bump your head on a shelf. One jar wobbles. You catch it in time. Barely. You murmur a curse, not a serious one, just the kind apothecaries use when they're out of clean linen or patience, and climb down from your loft bed. It's time for morning rituals. You light a small taper, heat a kettle, pour a splash of rainwater into the basin. You wash your hands not just to remove sleep, but to reset, to tell the body that work is coming, and sacred things will soon be touched. Today's first task, the holy syrup. You tie on a clean apron and begin selecting ingredients. Rose petals dried and slightly faded, but still fragrant honey from the convent apiary, a dash of clove. You grind the petals gently, humming as you do, not a song, not quite, just a rhythm your body remembers from long ago. Your master used to do the same. You thought it was silly until the first time your own hands moved without thought, and the humming followed. You measure the honey with a wooden spoon passed down through 3 apprenticeships. It's stained smooth as river rock and still smells faintly of anise. Next you reach for a vial on the high shelf. Holy water. Yes, actual holy water, collected from the cathedral font blessed by the archdeacon, stored in a jar marked with a faded cross. You mix just a few drops into the rose syrup. And there it is, the blending of faith and pharmacy. It's not rare, not strange. In fact, in your time, it's expected. Apothecaries aren't monks. But you might be next door to holiness, and that counts for something. You keep a small shelf of saint relics, bone splinters, pressed medallions, a feather you swear came from an angel's pillow. They sit near your pestles and tinctures. Not for use, for presence. A woman once came to you in tears, asking for something to ease her child's nightmares. You gave her lavender and mint. But before she left, you whispered a prayer into the cloth sachet. You didn't tell her what kind, just let her believe. It worked. Or it didn't. Or it did because she believed it would. Historians still argue whether prayers had real curative power or simply comforted people enough to let the body heal. You've long stopped caring which it is. You've seen it. A whispered Ave Maria can steady hands faster than ginger root. You once brewed a headache tonic while reciting Psalm 6 under your breath. The man claimed he felt cured before it even touched his lips. You're not sure whether that says more about the recipe or your pronunciation. But piety isn't just spiritual, it's practical. You offer prayers when you're unsure, when the patient's fever won't break, when the rash spreads anyway, when someone brings a child too quiet, too cold, and looks at you like you have answers no one else does. You whisper the names of saints under your breath as you work. Saint Cosmas for healing, Saint Apollonia for teeth, Saint Dymphna for the mind. You're no priest, but you've lit candles at midnight with just as much hope. You keep a candle burning beside a statue of the Virgin, nestled between jars of thyme and fennel. It's a little ridiculous, a little touching, and completely sincere. Customers expect it. A few scoff, of course. There's always someone too wealthy to pray and too stubborn to believe. But they come anyway. And when you hand them the syrup, they don't ask about the holy water. They just nod and pay and hope. Today, a young woman arrives just after the syrup is bottled. She carries a bundle white cloth tightly wrapped. Inside, an infant barely a month old. The child is flushed, breathing fast, eyes fluttering like candlelight in wind. You don't hesitate. You take the syrup, warm it gently, add a whisper of motherwort. As you prepare it, your lips move without sound, another half prayer, half muscle memory. You hand the mother the cloth-wrapped vial. She clutches it like scripture. You don't promise a cure, just presence. And that's the thing, people come not just for what's in the jar, but for the ritual surrounding it. The care, the quiet, the way you heat the spoon before stirring, the cloth you use to wrap the bottles, the fact that you pause always just a moment before sealing the cork. It tells them someone is watching. Someone still believes in more than powders and steam. You once had a priest ask for a remedy for doubt. You gave him juniper incense and told him to burn it while listening to rain. He never told you whether it worked, but he started smiling more. You finish the holy syrup, label it with care, and store it in the glass-fronted cupboard above the hearth. Not because it needs to be visible, but because it deserves to be. The shop is quiet again. The cat sneezes in his sleep. The herbs rustle slightly like parchment stirred by breath. And you, the apothecary, whisper thanks to rosemary, to rose to God, and to the silence that lets both speak. You hear it before you see it. The dull, frantic clatter of hooves against cobblestone, followed by the unmistakable sound of someone banging on your shutters, hard enough to startle the cat out of a dead sleep. You don't even bother with your shoes. You grab your apron, tie it halfway, and throw the door open into chaos. A boy stands, breathless, sweat clinging to his face despite the early chill. He shouts just one word, plague, before bending double to catch his breath. Your stomach sinks, but your hands are already moving. You don't need confirmation. The town's been tense all week, whispers at market. A priest preaching louder than usual, too many closed shutters on a sunny day. You grab your scented sachet from the hook by the door, a tightly stitched pouch of camphor, cloves, and dried marjoram bound with ribbon and hope. You tuck it into the neck of your robe. It does nothing for your lungs, maybe, but it tells your nerves, I'm protected. You gather your plague kit, vinegar-soaked rags, bundles of herbs, jars of dried angelica root, a big clay bottle labeled thieves' vinegar. It's a fierce brew of garlic, rosemary, and stubbornness, rumored to ward off death itself, also rumored to cure warts. You wouldn't know. You've never dared try it on your face. The boy tugs your sleeve. The cooper's wife, he pants. She's got the swellings. You nod. The buboes, you think, though you won't say it out loud. You find your thickest gloves. You soak your scarf in strong vinegar and wrap it tight around your nose and mouth. You tell the cat to stay inside. He does not listen. At the cooper's house, the air is too still. Inside, the woman lies on a cot, sweating rivers, her breathing short and shallow. Her skin is flushed, and beneath one arm, yes, there it is, the swelling dark and angry, a lump the size of a goose egg. She moans, tries to speak. You hush her gently. Her husband stands frozen. It's the plague, isn't it? He whispers. You say nothing. Instead, you open your satchel. You start with vinegar compresses. They sting. She groans. You apply onion poultices, hot and sticky, pressed to her chest and underarms. You add powdered angelica to her water and urge her to sip, even if she can't keep much down. There's no known cure, only rituals, only hope. You do what you can. You make her sweat, hoping to drive the poison out. You open the windows against superstition, but for the air. And most importantly, you stay calm. If your hands shake, hers will too. You send her husband outside. He tries to argue. You tell him simply, if she dies, it won't help for you to follow. He goes. Hours pass. The fever breaks, then returns hotter. The light outside fades. You light a taper. Burn rosemary on a plate. Recite a half-remembered prayer to Saint Sebastian, the go-to saint for plagues and arrows alike. You wonder sometimes if he minds the pairing. Historians still argue whether the treatments of apothecaries helped the afflicted or merely slowed the inevitable. But here tonight you are the only thing standing between this woman and complete despair. That must count for something. When the worst of it settles, when her breathing evens, even if just barely, you clean her gently change. The linens whisper thanks into the folds of the blanket. You wash your hands in boiled wine and your arms and your face. You try not to gag. You step outside dizzy from heat and fear and vinegar. The Cooper is there pacing. He turns at the creak of the door. You raise a hand, palm flat, not victory but pause. She's still with us, you say. He crumples with relief. Back at the shop, you throw your outer clothes into the vinegar vat. You scrub yourself like you're trying to erase your own skin. You drink a spoonful of thieves' vinegar, not for health, but as punishment. It burns going down. You welcome it. The cat finally returns, smelling suspiciously like someone else's supper. You sit by the fire, every muscle vibrating. You remember the last plague. You were still an apprentice then. Your master fell ill on the 3rd day. You took over the shop by the 5th. He died on the 6th. You kept the door open, even when the priest told you to board it up. You survived, somehow. And now once again people will come to you when the coughing starts and the swellings bloom, not because you have the cure, but because you'll try. Because someone has to. The bell rings again. You don't rise. Let them wait just 5 more minutes. You wake to the smell of pepper. Not your pepper, someone else's. Rich, sharp, imported, carried on someone's robe or tucked into the seams of a money purse fat with overseas coin. You sit up slowly, your joints creak like old shutters, and your spine feels like it slept wrong on principle. At the door stands a merchant, his shoes too clean for your alley, his cloak lined with fur despite the mild weather. He steps inside like he owns the floorboards and immediately wrinkles his nose. "Smells like vinegar," he mutters. You smile sweetly. Good, that means it's working. He doesn't laugh, but that's fine. You weren't trying to be funny. Much. He produces a small velvet pouch and opens it just wide enough for you to catch the glint of nutmeg. Real nutmeg. Wrinkled brown and precious, worth more than gold if you know the right buyers. You do. "I need it preserved," he says, "for travel." You nod. Of course. Spice merchants are always half trusting, half paranoid. They want their goods to last through storms, thieves, heat, and rats the size of heretics. And they want it done now. You gesture him toward the stool near the hearth, wobbly but solid enough for a man with no visible humility, and set to work. Nutmeg isn't just for food. In your world, it's medicine, good for digestion, calms nerves, smells divine. And if you mix it with just the right amount of clove and wine, it can make a dying man feel like he's just drunk summer. You store your best spices in glass jars wrapped in wool. Ginger root, cinnamon bark, crushed long, pepper, dried orange peel. Treasures everyone. You once caught an apprentice trying to pinch a few cloves. He claimed it was for toothache. You didn't believe him. Toothaches don't live in the back pocket. The spice trade is booming. Ships dock in Marseille and unload dreams. Silk ink, dried dates, and the holy trinity of the Apothecaries spice rack, pepper, cinnamon, and cardamom. Historians agree for once that these items changed everything: trade routes, diets, medicine, even wars. A barrel of cloves could fund a bishop's cathedral or bribe a king's favorite. And here you are sealing a few pitiful grams into a beeswax wrap, while the merchant pretends he isn't sweating about sea pirates. You hand it back wrapped and bound with a blessing stitched in saffron thread. He raises an eyebrow. "It's superstition," you explain, "but so is your profit margin." He leaves without saying thank you. You don't mind. Later you sort your own spice stock. The peppercorns are almost out. You mark it down. You grind a few for tincture, black pepper and vinegar for cold limbs. Then you refill your scent sachets with cinnamon and orange peel, both warm and sweet like memory and comfort stirred together. A young man enters, shy, too thin. He wants something to make meals easier. You peer at him, pale tongue, slow pulse voice like a drifting feather. You mix ginger and cardamom in honey, a spoonful before meals, not just for taste but for courage. He thanks you in 3 languages. Then comes the widow with the limp. She complains about her knees, the weather, and the neighbor's rooster. You offer a balm made from clove oil and beeswax. She calls it witchcraft, then asks for 2 jars. The day continues like that, small aches, delicate complaints, and the constant hum of spices in the air. They're not just ingredients, they're messages. A pinch of cinnamon means warmth, a drop of cardamom hope, a whiff of nutmeg luxury or longing, sometimes both. You keep a little book just for spice recipes, not official ones. These are personal, scribbled notes about what calmed whose cough, what made a child sleep, what once made a knight cry in his stew. There's a blend you call Wanderer's Tea, pepper, clove, ginger, and a hint of crushed coriander. People drink it before long journeys or breakups. You never ask which. There's an old belief that nutmeg under the tongue can grant visions. You've tried it. You saw the ceiling spin, the cat speak in Latin, and the ghost of your master judging your penmanship. You don't recommend it. Still, you keep a few whole nuts locked in your cupboard, just in case. The bell rings again. A noblewoman arrives, followed by 2 servants and a scent trail of musk and pride. She wants something exotic, something that no one else in court has. You give her saffron powder in a blown glass vial. She gasps like you handed her a moonbeam. You say nothing about the onion powder mixed in. Let her imagine. As twilight settles, the shop smells like distant lands, sweet and sharp, warm and rich. You pour yourself a small glass of warm wine spiced with cinnamon and orange peel. You sip it slowly. Let it coat your tongue and the edges of your day. This is the part no one sees, the quiet reverence for things that once grew under foreign suns, carried in palm-woven baskets, whispered into docks, before being folded into jars. You have never seen a cinnamon tree, never touched the Spice Islands, but every time you grind a clove, you hear the echo of sails in a wind you've never felt. You label your final jar of the evening, just one word: comfort. You're halfway through restocking the rosemary jar when you hear the soft creak of the back pew door, the kind of noise that only happens in churches or apothecaries just before something mildly scandalous. In walks Sister Blanche. She's not officially a customer, but she visits more often than most. Always in the same habit, always with the same knowing smirk, and always looking like she's about to say something uncomfortably honest. "I'm not here for gossip," she begins, which absolutely means she is. You nod, pour 2 cups of lukewarm barley tea, and gesture for her to sit. This is part of the apothecary's unspoken role, healer, herbalist, and hub of very quiet chaos. You're not just a place for ointments, you're a listening post, a confessional without the incense. And yes, there are rules. You're technically required to be registered with the city. The guild checks in once a year, assuming they remember. You're expected to keep records clean, neat, legible Latin. You do, sort of. Your ledger includes such brilliant entries as "Old Man Boyle's repeat customer" and "For sadness. Gave her mint and honey and didn't ask questions." You're also supposed to post your prices. You don't. You adjust based on shoes posture and whether the person called you "my dear" or "witch." Sister Blanche sips her tea and casually mentions that Father Gilbert has been sneezing since Michaelmas. It could be a curse, she adds entirely too brightly. You smile, or maybe dust, or the fact that he eats pickled herring for breakfast. She shrugs. I'm just saying he might need a tonic. A holy one. And there it is, the dance, where public health meets backdoor politics. You hand her a sachet of hyssop wrapped in blue linen. For the dust, you say. She nods, slips you a coin. I'm sure the sisters will be curious. They always are. Because this local gossip is your second most traded commodity. You hear it all. Who's coughing? Who's vanishing into the woods at odd hours? Who's asking for too much licorice powder with not enough toothache to justify it? And it matters, because sometimes that gossip becomes medicine. You hear that the tanner's boy has a rash no one can cure. You know it's probably from the tannin vats. You've seen it before. You make a paste of chamomile and vinegar. Problem solved. You hear that a certain barmaid is fainting weakly. You know it's not the food. You quietly pass along iron syrup and a gentle suggestion to eat more liver. You also hear when someone's spreading rumors that your calming elixir is just sweetened wine, which is technically true, but you add rosemary, so that's at least 40% pharmaceutical. Historians still argue whether apothecaries were respected for their knowledge or merely tolerated for their usefulness. You suspect the truth lies somewhere near. Don't like them, but don't let them leave town. Legally, you're required to swear an oath to serve honestly, to not counterfeit remedies, and to report any signs of plague or witchcraft. You did swear it, loudly, in Latin, with crossed fingers. You also muttered a second oath under your breath in French, promising not to poison anyone who didn't really deserve it. You once received a letter from the guild inspector, very official, sealed in wax flourish script full of polite threats. You ignored it for 3 days, then dusted off your nicest apron, rearranged your shop, and hosted the inspection with fresh bread and an accidental wine spill on the ledger. He approved your licorice stock and made a note about your innovative shelving technique. You're still not sure if that was a compliment or a warning. Today you tidy your jars before Vespers. You refill the licorice, top off the elderflower, relabel the marigold because someone smudged it to look like maggot, which did not help sales. You straighten the shelves not because you must, but because it helps you think. Each jar is a conversation, each label a memory. You still keep your experimental shelf top corner half hidden, marked with a small symbol no one but you understands. It holds a bottle of cherry bark syrup that turned black and now smells like ink, a dried fig stuffed with wormwood, a jar of sleeping dust you haven't dared open since it put the cat into a 14-hour nap. You shouldn't use them, but you won't throw them away either. Even the church gets curious. A certain deacon once asked if you could make a powder to encourage moral restraint. You gave him valerian root and a long, knowing look. He never came back. Your shop, in many ways, is a living record of the town, its troubles, its hopes, its lies, and you, its quiet keeper. You finish your tea as the bells chime for evening mass. Sister Blanche rises, tucks her sachet into her sleeve, and winks. Bless you, of course, she says. You smile, locking the door behind her. Not because you fear theft, but because secrets like spices keep better in the dark. The door opens, and in she walks, veil-tilted cheeks, flushed eyes darting like a pigeon who's made a bad decision. You don't need to ask. This is a broken heart. You gesture her to the stool by the fire. You pour something warm, mint tea sweetened with honey and marjoram. She sips like it's her first drink in a week. It might be. Then the tears start. Not dramatic, not loud, just quiet weeping into the sleeve of her linen dress while you pretend to measure licorice powder. You've seen this before, you'll see it again. The symptoms of heartbreak are strangely consistent. Fatigue, loss of appetite, mysterious sore throat, occasional poetry, and a sudden spike in interest for rose-flavored anything. I just want to feel like myself again, she whispers. You nod. Apothecaries aren't supposed to treat matters of the heart officially, but unofficially love is one of your best customers. You begin to build a prescription for sorrow. You start with lemon balm, the heart herb they call it. Bright citrusy, a plant that smells like smiling. You mix it with rose petals for gentleness, mint for clarity, and just a trace of valerian root because no one cries well on no sleep. You pack the herbs into linen, tie it with twine, and give her 2 instructions: steep slowly and breathe in the scent before sipping. That part's not optional, you add. She laughs through her nose. Progress. You also hand her a vial of syrup, apple cider vinegar, honey sage, and a few drops of orange blossom water. You call it elixir of bright days. It's not in any official apothecary manual. But then again, neither is falling for a boy who writes letters in bad Latin. Historians don't often write about emotional medicine. They chart plague, childbirth, war wounds. But heartbreak, that's the quiet epidemic, the one that makes people forget to eat, the one that turns bustling markets into shadows, the one that makes your strongest patient stare at walls for hours. You've crafted remedies for mourning too. After plagues, fires, disappearances, you make sleeping draughts for widows and tonics for the hollow-cheeked fathers who sit silent in your shop, unable to say what's gone missing. There's a jar on your shelf labeled Remedy for Echoes. Inside is a mix of lavender, fennel seed, violet sugar, and the tiniest whisper of wine. It's not for the body, it's for the places grief rattles around in. One time a man came in asking for a potion to forget. You told him gently, "That's not how it works, but I can make something that helps you remember without bleeding." He cried into your cat. She was not pleased. You've noticed heartbreak shows up in unusual ways. A merchant might complain about sleeplessness. A maid might say her throat feels tight. A nun might ask for something so I don't think during prayers. You always listen, you always know. There are fringe beliefs, of course. One book claims that placing a warmed clove between the toes and reciting the name of your beloved backwards under a full moon will ease sorrow. You tried it once. All it did was make your feet smell like mulled wine. But there's something beautiful about the way rituals comfort: crushing petals, heating water, stirring clockwise, wrapping jars with ribbon. These things don't need to work chemically because they work emotionally. They say you are doing something, you are moving forward, even if just by stirring a spoon. You remember your own first heartbreak. You were still apprenticing. A girl with amber eyes who loved nettle tea and read aloud badly. She left town with a traveling weaver. You cried into the vinegar barrel. Your master handed you a tin of candied ginger and said, "This won't fix it, but you'll stop hiccuping at least." He wasn't wrong. The woman finishes her tea, steadies her hands, and smooths her dress. You give her the sachets, the vial, and a tin of licorice lozenges, just in case you feel dramatic in public. She leaves a coin and a note. The coin is standard. The note simply says, "Thank you for treating something others can't see." You place it in your drawer with the others. You have quite a collection. Later, a boy arrives asking if you have anything for nerves. He stutters, won't meet your eyes, fumbles with the edge of his tunic. You hand him a vial of lemon balm and rose syrup and tell him it helps with speaking one's mind. He grins, takes 2. You say nothing. As night falls, the shop feels quieter than usual. Maybe it's the rose scent lingering in the air. Maybe it's the tea still steeping by the window. You sit at your work table and scribble a new entry in your personal book. For a cracked heart, lemon balm to remember light, rose to soften the ache, mint to clear the cobwebs, sleep, and time, more time than anyone wants to wait for. You pack lightly, but precisely. 2 satchels, one for tools, one for food. You tuck a flask of mint syrup beside a jar of sugared almonds, wrap a linen bundle of dried marigold and chamomile, then after some hesitation add a small packet of dried figs stuffed with angelica root. Not medicinal, just comforting. Your legs will thank you halfway up the hill. Today you're going on what apothecaries call a botanical pilgrimage. Outside the city walls, the air smells different, greener, looser, like it hasn't yet agreed to behave. You walk past sheep grazing like monks in a slow-moving prayer, past hedgerows buzzing with bees who do not care about your titles or tinctures, past a little girl who offers you a daisy and then asks if you know how to fix a lizard with a broken toe. You say probably, because what else do you say to a future heartbreak? Out here in the wilderness of herbs and mud, you become something between student and scavenger. The city knows you as an apothecary. The fields know you as a polite intruder. You kneel in the grass and begin. First up, comfrey broadleaves hairy stem hidden behind a wall of nettles that sting you out of spite. You murmur thanks as you pick it, for bruises mostly, and sprains, and the occasional mother-in-law who throws her hip out during a family argument. Next, wild thyme, low to the ground, growing where nothing else dares. You collect it tenderly, for coughs, for courage, for stews that need a reminder that bitterness can be fragrant. Further along, under a cluster of ancient stones, you find mallow, soft as apology, almost always overlooked. Good for burns, ulcers, and tea drunk slowly by people who don't yet know how to grieve. Botanical pilgrimages are equal parts harvesting and listening. You don't just take, you pause. You notice where plants cluster, where they avoid what grows near water, what wilts under full sun. You begin to understand why some cures work better, depending on the phase of the moon or the temperament of the gatherer. Historians still debate whether these trips were science or superstition, whether herbs gathered during rainstorms truly held sorrow, or if it was just a poetic excuse to complain about mud in your boots. You know better than to argue. You once picked wormwood on the morning after a funeral. It burned your hands, left a bitterness in your tea that wouldn't fade for days. You labeled the jar for endings and never used it twice in a row. You also know that location changes everything. Juniper from the hills is spicier. Lavender from near the monastery always smells faintly of incense. And the St. John's wort near the old battleground stronger than anything else in your stockroom. Something about blood in the soil, you suspect. You stop for lunch beneath an ash tree, eat bread and cheese, sip watered wine, and watch ants try to claim your napkin. The air is quiet except for birds gossiping in the canopy and the distant, ever-reliable sound of someone yelling at a goat. You take a moment to breathe, to exist outside the walls. Out here, you're not the expert. You're just someone with a basket and a little humility. You collect meadowsweet for fevers, elderflowers for colds, burdock root despite the bees' protests. You find nettles and pick them anyway. Painful now, helpful later. Like most truths, on the edge of a marsh, you stop. There it is, marshmallow, the real kind. Sticky root, soft flowers. Your master called it moon plant because it grew where the ground wept. You dig gently, avoiding the frogs, and then unexpectedly mandrake. Not the full root, just the leaves, curled and dark. You don't touch them. Not today. Not without gloves. You nod in respect. Some plants aren't meant to be harvested without ceremony or sleep. You mark the spot with a stone. Maybe you'll come back. Heading home, your satchels are heavier, your knees louder, and your boots a bit more honest. You walk slower now, weighed not just by herbs, but by a quiet satisfaction. You've restocked, yes, but you've also remembered why you started, why it matters. By the time you reach the city gates, the sun is low, your hair smells like crushed rosemary, and there's dirt under your nails that will stay for days, no matter what you do. The guards wave you through without a glance. Apothecaries are trusted or feared, often both. Back in your shop, you unpack each bundle with care, lay them on drying racks, hang the leafy stems, label the paper packets. The room smells like green medicine and wood smoke. You brew yourself a small tea, marigold, thyme, and mallow. The cup warms your hands, your chest, your memory. Outside, the moon rises, round, watchful. You write in your personal log, gathered courage in the form of leaves, found comfort in mud, lost a sandal to nettles, regained a little faith. She doesn't knock. She never does. You hear the latch lift, the door creak, and then the soft tread of practical shoes, boots that have walked the same muddy streets as yours, but with different consequences. She's wearing the same apron as yesterday, slightly scorched near the hem. Her sleeves are rolled up, her hair pinned with a wooden needle, and she smells faintly of basil and something that might be soot. Morning, she says. You nod. She walks past you, checks the fire, then opens the drawer where you keep the powdered eggshell. Not a word, not a request, just routine. You didn't hire her, you didn't even ask for help. She simply showed up one morning 3 years ago with the same stubborn stare you once saw in a mirror. You asked what she wanted. She said, to learn. You handed her a bucket and told her the privy needed scrubbing. She stayed. Officially, women aren't supposed to run apothecaries. Not alone, anyway. Not without a father or husband or brother to co-sign the tinctures. Guild laws say so. Churchmen frown. Even some customers hesitate when they see her behind the counter. But unofficially, women run half the shops in town. Wives of apothecaries, daughters, cousins who live in the back room and do all the grinding, widows who never close the doors after their husbands coughed once too hard in the wrong decade. Historians still argue how many women practiced apothecary work in secret versus how many simply ignored the rules. But you know this when people are bleeding, choking, or weeping. They don't care who hands them the remedy. Your apprentice, though neither of you call her that anymore, knows this too. She measures out rosemary by touch, crushes clove between her fingers. She's better with stubborn patience than you are, especially men with head colds and oversized egos. She gave me a look, one complained once. She gave you ginger and advice you corrected. She said I was full of wind. She was right. She handles children like a priest handles relics, gentle, reverent, only slightly amused. They trust her, maybe because she kneels when she talks to them, maybe because she doesn't offer sweets unless it's necessary. She's the one who redesigned the drying rack to keep the cat out of the mint. She's also the one who discovered that powdered licorice mixed with honey makes a sore throat lozenge that tastes like memory. You suspect sometimes that she knows more than you did at her age, and that thrills you. You give her the heavy tasks now, the bookkeeping, the harvest notes, the letters to distant merchants requesting myrrh cinnamon, or that weird yellow resin no one else can identify but everyone swears works on swollen feet. She never complains. Except about your handwriting. Is that honey or hornet, she asks. Depends on the day, you reply. One time you caught her adding borage flowers to a heartbreak remedy without asking. You raised an eyebrow. They give courage, she said, and they're pretty. You nodded. Approved. There's a reason you've never asked her to swear the oath. Not the guild version, not the Latin chant with ink and witnesses. That comes later. Maybe, if she wants. She's already sworn something better every morning when she opens the shutters. Every night when she stays late to finish cleaning the vinegar press. And you see the way she looks at the locked cupboard. Not greedy, not afraid, just aware. Like she's waiting for the moment when you hand her the key without ceremony. It's coming. For now, you let her mix the daily syrup, elderberry mint, and a dash of ground mustard. She stirs without spilling, adds one extra drop of lemon, says nothing. You don't correct her. You wouldn't dare. The guild inspector passed by last week, didn't stop in, but you caught him glancing through the window. She should keep quiet when he's here, one of your older patients muttered. You smiled, then raised your voice to ask her for the alkanet root. Let him hear. She brings in new ideas, wears trousers under her skirt when traveling. Once suggested writing dosage instructions on the jar, which made your left eye twitch, but turned out to be wildly helpful. And yes, people talk. But people also heal and return and ask for her by name now. That's the difference. She's not your shadow. She's your equal. One day the shop will be hers, not because of your blessing, but because of her work. Her fingers already know the way around the shelves in the dark. Her thoughts already echo yours when the fever rises. You watch her now as she bundles thyme and lavender into tight braids for drying. She hums off-key content. You make a note in your ledger. She remembered the borage. I forgot, the shop will be fine. The first thing you see is the glass. Round green, thick at the base, blown unevenly by hand with the kind of tiny bubbles that make it shimmer in candlelight like old water. It's not the best jar in the shop, not by utility anyway, but it sits on the front shelf angled just so because it looks expensive. People assume whatever's inside must be powerful. It's just sugar syrup. Honey thick laced with thyme and lemon peel, but wrapped in velvet ribbon and sealed with red wax. People would swear it cured heartbreak boils and maybe ennui. Welcome to medieval branding. Being an apothecary isn't just about recipes, it's about perception. You learn very quickly that people don't buy what works, they buy what feels like it might. And nothing feels more powerful than something bottled, like a relic from heaven. Take your labels. Neat Latin script on parchment tags, edges scorched with a candle just a little for effect. You tried plain labels once. Sales dropped. Now even the chamomile looks like it might contain divine essence, or, at the very least, a mild epiphany. You organize your shelves not by ingredient, but by aesthetic. Warm tones near the entrance, cool greens and silvers in the shadowy alcove. The jars with glow your colorful oils, your jewel-toned syrup sit closest to the counter where candlelight can do the heavy lifting. Your master used to say a cure is only half in the bottle. The other half is in the expectation. He wasn't wrong. There's a deep red flask filled with rosewater that smells like dusk in late summer. You sell it to exactly one customer, a lady who insists it helps her remember who she was before marriage. You've never had the heart to tell her. It's just rainwater steeped with petals, because here's the truth. If it works, it is medicine. Then there's the import shelf. Not everything on it is actually imported, of course. Some is clever fabrication, but that faint scent of foreign parchment, And sea salt real. You rub a little on the shelf boards weekly, makes the cinnamon smell twice as exotic. You've learned the art of jar choice. Thick glass for syrups, thin necks for oils, round pots for balms, and always, always one bottle that's just slightly too beautiful to sell placed near the window where sunlight can catch it. People ask about it. You say not for sale. They nod, then buy twice as much of something else. Your competitors across the street don't get this. They still use old jars with waxy build-up, scribbled labels, mismatched lids. Their cough tonic could cure a bishop, but it looks like soup. And no one wants soup when they're dying of heartbreak or sinus pressure. You once visited their shop just to see. You counted 4 crooked shelves, 2 broken windows, and 0 sense of scent control. The whole place smelled like boiled celery. You bought a packet of mustard seeds out of pity. And yet, they stay open. Why? Because branding can't fake experience forever. People try your jar of saffron honey basil glory because it looks miraculous, but they return because their throat stopped hurting and their mood lifted for the first time in a week. You let the display do the tempting, then you let the medicine do the proving. You keep a secret stash of decorative materials, silk ribbons from broken robes, shards of stained glass for color, comparison, even a small lump of lapis lazuli. You grind down occasionally just to tint your balm jars blue. Unnecessary. Yes. Effective. Absolutely. Historians rarely discuss apothecaries as designers, but you know better. Form matters. A little flair in the cork seal, a wax stamp shaped like a clover, a sprig of lavender tied to the bottleneck. People love a story. Even more, they love one they can smell. You write your product names in flourished ink. Moon balm for sleep. Morning clarity for fevers and fog. Lion's breath, mostly mustard and honey for courage and colds. Silken remedy tastes terrible, works wonderfully. Even the cat gets his own jar, a tiny ceramic pot marked with a paw print. You tell children it's for curing nightmares in animals. In truth, it's full of dried valerian and makes your cat so blissful she forgets to knock over the vinegar. Today, a traveler wanders in, dusty and curious. He points at a shelf filled with colored jars and asks, "Are they real?" You smile. "They're effective." He buys 3, doesn't even ask the price. You make a note in your personal ledger. Red wax works better than green. Saffron ribbon makes people think it's expensive, even when it's not. Must refill the moon balm. Everyone sleeps terribly in spring. Later, your apprentice brings in a new batch of jars, thin glass, curved like river stones, utterly useless for pouring. You hold one up to the candlelight. It shimmers like lake water in twilight. You smile. Perfect. The man outside your door is wearing a feather in his hat and a grin that suggests he's about to request something either foolish or slightly illegal. You don't flinch. Instead, you untie your apron, fold it neatly, and prepare for what the afternoon has clearly decided to become a parade of odd requests and side hustles. He leans on your counter, lowers his voice like someone about to confess a sin in rhyme, and says, "Do you have anything that might make me disappear?" You blink. As in metaphorically. "No," he says cheerfully. "I want to vanish, just a little." You stare. He clarifies, "There's a woman, a husband, a party." You understand. You nod, slowly. Not because you approve, but because, yes, you absolutely understand. You offer him a vial of smoke powder, made from dried mugwort powdered charcoal and a bit of theatrical flair. "Throw it," you say, and walk away while they cough. He pays in silver and leaves whistling. That's your first invisibility request of the week, which is either a sign of good weather or bad marriages. The truth is, apothecaries deal in more than sore throats and saint-blessed sleep. You're also a purveyor of love spells marketed as tonics for social confidence. Dog dewormers, less glamorous, oddly more popular. Wart remedies that may or may not be just mashed garlic with a prayer written backwards. Hair tonics that smell faintly like optimism and burnt nettle. Some requests are easy. Someone wants something to help a goat who won't shut up. You hand them chamomile-soaked oats. They come back a week later to say the goat still talks, but in a more reasonable tone. Some are harder. A baker's boy once asked for something to make his crush fall in love with him. You gave him a licorice and rose lozenge and told him to start with a compliment. He returned 3 days later with a blush and the unmistakable pride of a boy who'd been kissed. You refilled his jar for free. You have a whole drawer labeled delicate matters. It's where you store things for fertility, for contraception, for issues of intimacy that come whispered with hot ears and lowered eyes. You never judge. You just measure carefully. Historians still debate whether medieval apothecaries knowingly sold love potions or simply repackaged herbs with mood-lifting qualities. The answer, as usual, is both. You've watched a man weep over your saffron tea, then write sonnets to a woman who only came in for tooth powder. Your personal favorite remedy, a blend of peppermint hawthorn and crushed violet candy. You call clarity in matters of the heart. It works about half the time. The other half people return and ask if you have anything stronger. You offer sage and a long walk. Sometimes the requests are less romantic and more practical. A man once asked for something to make his boots quieter. You gave him beeswax and asked no further questions. A tavern owner begged for a remedy to mask the smell of boiled cabbage. You handed her 2 jars, one with dried orange peel, one with strong mint, and told her to burn both. She came back with 5 more orders and a tip. And then there are the traders, always passing through, always looking for a quick cure, a fast thrill, or a weird souvenir. One asked for something spicy enough to make a monk cry. You gave him powdered mustard and clove oil. The monk didn't cry, but the trader did twice. You've also developed a few side products unintentionally. A balm for cracked heels that became a fashionable lip salve. A flea repellent for dogs now worn behind ears by nobility. A sleep powder that doubles as a pie spice if you ignore the dreams. You try not to sell snake oil, but occasionally a little illusion is helpful, like your moon milk, which is just warm milk, nutmeg, and honey in a pale jar. People swear it works better than anything else. They're not wrong. And no, not everything you sell is legal. There's a man who pays well for strong laxatives labeled as meditation aids. You don't ask. You just label them carefully and add a sprig of mint for flavor. Your apprentice once caught you bottling something that sparkled strangely. "What is that?" she asked. You smiled. "Profitable." She didn't press. At the end of the day, you relabel the day's leftovers. Move the unicorn horn dust-powdered oyster shell to the back shelf. Wipe down the jar of tiger balm, mostly mustard and vinegar. And update your private log. 2 invisibility requests. 1 goat inquiry. 3 heartbreak lozenges. 10 laughs. 1 small lie. You rinse your hands. Light a taper. The room smells like secrets and nutmeg. And you smile just a little. Because being an apothecary isn't always about truth. Sometimes it's about offering something to hold on to when truth is too heavy to lift. You're halfway through measuring powdered marshmallow root when it happens. A knock. Too early in the morning to be polite, too firm to be casual. You sigh, set the spoon down, and open the door. It's Martin the butcher's son, barefoot, wild-eyed, holding a jar. He doesn't say anything. He just holds it out like it contains a crime. You take the jar, you sniff the jar, and then you realize exactly what you've done. Oh, you say, your voice hoarse from suppressed laughter. Oh no. You open it again to be sure. Yes, that's your soothing sleep syrup, except it smells like bitter orange and senna, which means one thing. You gave him the laxative. You pause, blink, process. He doesn't say a word. You begin. I drank the whole thing, he whispers. You nod, and then, I didn't sleep. No. I didn't dream. No. Bay. You hold up a hand. You don't have to describe it. He nods once. Thank you. Then he turns around and walks away, dignity clinging to him like a damp napkin. You close the door and lean against it, heart pounding with the particular horror of a mislabeled remedy. Your apprentice peeks in from the drying room, raises an eyebrow. I gave the butcher's son the wrong jar, you say. She winces. Again, you point at her. You're supposed to stop me from doing that. I was polishing the wormwood labels. You both know the real problem, the shelf with the soothing sleep syrups and the shelf with the purging tinctures are a little too close together. You also both know you've been promising to reorganize for the last 2 years. Well, she says brightly, at least he won't be carrying meat for a few days. You groan. Mistakes happen, even to the best apothecaries. You once sent a nobleman home with rosewater syrup for gout instead of his usual willow bark tincture. He returned with a smile and a request for more, said. His feet still hurt, but his mood improved dramatically. You didn't correct him. But this requires damage control. You pull out your apology kit. Yes, you have one. It includes a jar of blackberry jam, a sachet of lemon balm and mint, a small tin of rose-scented salve, and a handwritten note that says simply, mistakes happen, but at least this one smells nice. You deliver it yourself, quietly, before the meat stall opens. You find Martin sitting in the alley drinking water and staring into the existential distance. You hand him the apology bundle. He nods once. No words, just jam. Later that afternoon, you completely reorganize the shelves. Sleep remedies to the right, digestive aids to the left, laxatives as far from rose syrup as humanly possible. You even add new labels, big, bold, clear. No more mix-ups, probably. You take this as a sign to review all your storage logic. Why is the ointment for burns next to the wart remover? Why is the aphrodisiac honey stored above the tonic for melancholy? Why is the wormwood jar labeled in Greek? Historians still debate how organized medieval apothecaries truly were. Some suggest they followed strict taxonomies, plant-type ailment part of the body. Others argue it was closer to controlled chaos jars remembered by smell color or the shape of the lid. In your case, it's been whatever shelf was empty, but no more. You enlist your apprentice. You scrub. You sort. You spill one jar of ground mustard that immediately clears both of your sinuses. You relabel the soothing syrup shelf with big red dots. You tie green thread around every jar of purgative. You draw a tiny angry face on the one that caused the mix-up. You keep the note. Martin returned. It just says, much better sleep this time. You tack it to the inside of the cupboard. A reminder, a warning, a small involuntary joke. Because humor in an apothecary's life is often the only antidote to anxiety. You've made worse mistakes. You once added peppermint oil to a chest balm instead of camphor. The man said it made him feel like a saint being slapped. You corrected the recipe, but you still keep a jar of it labeled elation balsam. Someone buys it every month. Your apprentice comes in late that night, hands you a jar of tea. You sip. Sweet, calm, correct. You double-checked, you ask. She nods 3 times. You both laugh. Because in this line of work, laughter is its own medicine, as are apologies, jam, and the occasional bowel-emptying catastrophe. Before bed, you write in your ledger, laxative mislabeling, patient survived, may never look me in the eye again. Shelves reorganized, dignity pending. The shutters rattle hard enough to wake the dead, or at least one very tired apothecary. You grope for your robe, fumble for a candle stub, and step barefoot across the cold floor. The wind howls outside, flinging rain sideways into the alley. The bell above the door gives one pathetic jingle like even it knows this is far too early. And then comes the second knock. Insistent, rhythmic, the kind that says someone is sick, and it cannot wait until morning. You light your lantern, open the door, and immediately regret not finding your boots. Rain soaks through your soles in seconds. A boy stands in the storm, hair plastered to his face, shaking like he's trying to rattle his own bones loose. "Please," he gasps. "It's my sister. Fever. Won't wake up." You don't ask questions. You don't finish waking up. You just move. You grab your pouch already packed with the night kit, fever powder, willow bark, thyme oil, a clean cloth, dried elderflower, one small jar of balm that always smells faintly of miracle. You sling on a cloak, tug the hood tight, and follow the boy into the storm. The rain feels alive, cold fingers tapping your face, pushing at your chest like a panicked child. Your lantern flickers with every gust, but you keep it high, one arm around your pouch, the other on your hood. You reach the cottage, the door creaks open. Inside, the air is thick like wet wool and old breath. A fire burns low. A woman kneels by the hearth, pale with worry. You kneel beside the child. A girl, maybe 7, sweat clinging to her brow, lips dry, pulse like a skittish bird. Her skin radiates heat, not good heat, the kind that comes from a body too busy fighting to rest. You speak gently, to her, to the mother, to the storm. You don't say she'll be fine, because that's not a promise you ever make. But you say, "Let me try," and that is enough. You mix a quick draft willow bark, mint honey, a drop of clove oil, not too strong, enough to ease the burning behind her eyes. You soak a cloth in vinegar and lay it across her forehead. You whisper instructions like prayers. Cool the room, don't smother her in wool, no wine, no stew, just water slowly and time. The mother nods. You press a sachet of dried elderflower into her hand. Boil, steep. Only if she starts shivering again. She clasps your wrist, eyes bright with gratitude and terror. Will she? She's fighting, you say. And you've seen children win. You've seen them lose too, but never while no one tried. You stay an hour, maybe more. The fire warms your feet and your pouch grows lighter. The child stirs just once. Her fingers twitch. Her lips part, whisper something you don't catch. You catch the mother's sob. That's enough. You rise, finally stiff from the floor joints, humming with age you're too young for. The boy, silent now, walks you to the door. The rain's slowing, just drizzle now, a polite apology for earlier. You walk home alone. The lantern sways, casting shadows that dance with puddles. Your cloak drips, your shoes squish. But your heart feels a little steadier. These are the nights that define you. Not the tidy hours, not the well-lit days of predictable remedies, but the nights when a child is burning and the wind is screaming and you carry a little pouch and a little hope and the very real knowledge that no one else is coming. Historians may never write about this part. There are no records for midnight visits or the smell of rosemary on soaked linen. But this is where your craft lives, in the wet, shivering space between fear and action. You return to your shop. You stoke the fire, you peel off your cloak, hang it to steam. The cat gives you one unimpressed glance before returning to sleep. You refill your pouch from memory, not the ledger. You always remember what you use on nights like this. Your hands do anyway. You write a note to yourself. Child, fever, rain, left elderflower, refill vinegar bottle, keep balm near. And then, because you've earned it, you drink something hot. Honey lemon and a splash of your own peppermint tonic. Outside, the wind settles. The shutters finally stop complaining. Inside, you sit by the hearth, damp and grateful. And though your feet are freezing and your joints ache and your hair smells like thunder, you are deep down content. Because somewhere a child breathes easier. And because you tired and dripping and unspeakably human still showed up. The rain is gone. The earth, however, hasn't quite recovered. It squelches under your boots as you step into the garden, that small patch of stubborn green behind the shop where healing begins with dirt and ends with hope wrapped in twine. This is your sanctuary, half cultivated, half wild, bordered by a broken fence and two sleepy chickens who've adopted the parsley patch as their bed. You didn't ask for them. They never asked permission. You let them stay. The herb garden is a peculiar place, not entirely domestic, not entirely wild, somewhere between monastery cloister and compost pile. You walk the rows still in your robe, cupping the tender leaves like old friends. Lemon balm, bright and eager. Valerian, sour and secretive. Sage, dignified and slightly judgmental. There's a grave here, too. Not a person, not a pet, just a place you bury the plants that didn't work. A failed poultice, a balm that made the rash worse, a tincture that tasted like betrayal. You bury them here in silence. Mark the patch with a smooth stone. No names, no labels, just memory. It's part of the work. You kneel beside the feverfew, trimming the browning leaves, checking the soil. The scent rises, a bitter, clean tang that always reminds you of mid-autumn headaches and stubborn knights who refuse to drink their tonics unless bribed with candied ginger. You talk to your plants, quietly, sometimes only in your head, sometimes aloud. You thank the chamomile for blooming again. You apologize to the nettles for last week's harsh pruning. You ask the sage whether your apprentice is ready to take over the mustard bomb recipe. The sage does not answer, but you feel better for asking. Every apothecary you've ever known kept a garden. Even the ones in cities with no real soil. They'd grow thyme in chimney pots, rosemary in cracked ink jars, marjoram on the windowsill beside the dustiest ledger. You once met a woman who grew yarrow in her hat. Historians tend to focus on the remedies, the jars, the labels, the final products, but the truth is half the healing happens here, in the dirt, with scraped knees and a splinter under your fingernail, wondering whether that second-year valerian root is ready or just pretending to be. You once spent a week nurturing a vine you thought was rare imported sedum. Turned out to be a tenacious weed with excellent public relations. You still dried it, still bottled it, labeled it experimental number 3. A priest swore it cured his digestion. You refill the compost from the bucket by the shop door, leftovers from syrups, herb stems, peelings, a slice of bread the cat rejected. It all goes in, nothing wasted, not even the failures. At the far end of the garden is the shade patch. That's where you grow the more reclusive plants. Belladonna under a locked wire dome. Monkshood with a warning scratched into the soil. These aren't for beginners, or most people at all, but you keep them, because knowledge is power, and sometimes power is protection. You sit for a moment on the old bench by the lavender. It creaks. Everything creaks now. You watch your apprentice at the edge of the plot, scribbling in a small journal. She's measuring the mint estimating yield, trying to predict whether the late frost will ruin the nasturtiums again. You don't interrupt. There's a rhythm to garden work. Observe, decide, act, adjust. It mirrors the work inside. Only out here, mistakes don't cry or cough or whisper things you can't fix. Out here, mistakes just compost. You once treated a noblewoman who lost 3 children to fever. She came for sleep remedies. You gave her valerian. She didn't sleep. You gave her lemon balm. She cried. Finally, you gave her seeds, told her to plant them in a pot by her bed, water them when she couldn't pray. A year later, she sent you dried calendula and a note: these grew where prayers did not. You still have the flowers pressed in the back of your ledger. You stand, brush the soil from your knees, and return to the rosemary. It needs pruning. You cut carefully, not too much. Leave the plant strong. Always leave it stronger. You hum as you work. It's not a tune anyone taught you, just something your hands remember from years of doing this exact thing on days when the world seemed too loud. Back in the shop, you hang the fresh cuttings to dry. The smell follows you in green and sharp and alive. You sweep the floor, check the vinegar barrel, scratch the cat behind the ears. She sneezes once, approves. You make a cup of garden tea, just picked peppermint, a sliver of ginger, a petal of calendula. You sip it slowly. Then you write in your ledger, the garden is quiet today. Something is healing. I don't need to know what. It starts with a toothache. A woman walks in, clutching her cheek, face drawn tight with pain. It started last night, she says, and now it's inside my eye. You nod sympathetically. Offer her a seat. Begin gathering your tools. Toothaches are easy and impossible. You've got clove oil, of course, strong enough to stun the nerve. You dab a little on a scrap of linen, wrap it gently around a wooden probe, and hand it to her with instructions. She winces. Her eyes water. Then she exhales just a little. But behind the remedy, you can feel it stirring the old tug-of-war between science and superstition. Maybe I slept wrong, she says. Maybe, you say? Or maybe it's because I didn't bless the spoon last week when I stirred the soup. You pause, carefully neutral expression. She watches your face, then adds quickly, I did it the week before. I usually do. You smile gently, like you've heard this 100 times. Because you have. Toothaches are always more than toothaches. You've had patients blame the position of the moon, the tone of the church bell, or a neighbor's dirty look. One woman insisted her molar was cursed because she ate a quince offered by a man with too many buttons. And you know what? You never argue. Because the moment you dismiss someone's belief, they stop believing in you. So you apply the clove oil, offer a rinse of sage and vinegar, whisper a quiet word as you tie the cloth. She leaves lighter, not just from the pain relief, but from being heard. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine was effective science or elaborate performance. But if you're honest, it's both. You once cured a cough with boiled thyme and a sharp rebuke. You once failed to cure a rash with everything in your cupboard until you let the patient sleep with a saint's medallion under her pillow. It cleared overnight. You keep a small box of questionable items in the back, labeled not with Latin but with a single word, maybe. Inside, a bone charm carved with spiral marks, a dried beetle husk said to repel nightmare, a sachet of river clay used by a local midwife who insists it keeps men honest, a scrap of parchment with a phrase in Old Occitan that no one can translate, but which made your apprentice sneeze violently when she tried. Do they work? Maybe. And that's enough. You remember a farmer who claimed your lavender balm only helped when applied under a waning crescent moon. You started tracking his visits. He was right. Now you make two versions of the balm, one labeled day, one moon. No difference in ingredients, but the moon balm sells out faster. You once met a surgeon, big hands, blood under his nails, who scoffed at your apothecary, called it perfumed superstition. You asked him if he prayed before surgeries. He stopped scoffing. Because here's the truth. Belief heals even when the tincture doesn't. Your shop is filled with little rituals now, not just your own but your patient's. The woman who taps the counter twice before ordering. The merchant who always enters backwards during Lent. The child who insists you stir his syrup with a spoon touched by the sun. You honor them because belief is part of the medicine. You even have your own rituals. You never bottle feverfew on a Friday. You always light a taper before mixing mint and nettle. You hum the same off-key tune whenever you press balm into pots, something your master did, though he claimed not to. Your apprentice once asked why you keep a sprig of dried yarrow tied to the back door with red thread. You said, "Because I haven't had a burglary since I put it there." She nodded like that made perfect sense. It did. And yet you also measure precisely. You write down everything. You test your remedies. You throw away what fails. You are no fraud. You are simply aware that not everything that works needs to be explained. Somewhere between the saints and the syrups, between what's proven and what's whispered, you've found a rhythm that doesn't need justification. Later that evening, a priest stops in, says he has a sore knee, blames the devil. You hand him a comfrey poultice blessed with a quick murmur and a drop of holy water. He leaves, convinced it's divine. You smile, not because he's wrong, but because he believes. And maybe in the end, that's what medicine is. A salve, a story, a soft word. Something to hold when pain won't let go. You write in your ledger, toothache cured, faith preserved, added holy water to clove oil, not for chemistry, for comfort. It's nearly midnight when you unlock it. The family book, bound in flaking leather, stitched at the spine with thread that's more patch than binding by now. It smells like ink, beeswax, and centuries. The cover bears no title, just a thumbprint-shaped stain and the indent of someone's old belt buckle from when it traveled with saddlebags instead of sitting on a shelf. You open to the first page. The script is cramped and faded, but you can still read the name Jourdain of Carcassonne, 1323. He wasn't a famous apothecary, just thorough and poetic. He wrote recipes like psalms and footnotes like gossip, a syrup for stubborn lungs, for those who wheeze like bellows but talk like saints. Below that, a note in someone else's hand doubles as sleep aid, if taken with milk and boredom. You smile. This book holds everything. Every triumph, every accident, every misstep that didn't kill someone. 4 generations of apothecaries have written in it, not all related by blood, but all part of the line. You thumb through its thick pages. Here's the ink blot map of the shop from when the ceiling leaked during the summer of 41. You never fixed that spot. You like the way it creaks. Here's a recipe for spring wine for sorrow, made from dandelion petals and broken promises. Here's the list of forbidden pairings. Rue and angelica makes the patient hear birds. Cinnamon and feverfew caused swelling in the bishop's hands, uncertain if divine or dietary. Mint and rosemary smells too smug. Some pages are neat, almost reverent. Others are pure chaos notes scrawled sideways in charcoal margins filled with stars and circles, and once a drawing of a pigeon in a hat. You find your own handwriting halfway through. The ink is darker, the letters slanted. Your first entry years ago, a calming syrup that accidentally fermented and made two monks confess to things that definitely weren't biomedical. You kept the recipe. Your master's handwriting sits nearby, blocky, impatient, with a tendency to leave out measurements like just enough or until it feels right. You hated that at the time. Now you understand it perfectly. The book isn't just reference. It's inheritance. It's a living thing growing with each entry, breathing in the dust and tea steam of the shop. You've spilled so much on it over the years, wine vinegar, the blood of a very surprised goose, that the pages are practically laminated with memory. Historians love official manuals, guild books, translated texts from Galen or Avicenna. But this is what real apothecaries use. Because here's the truth, medicine is as much memory as it is method. You remember what works not just because it's written down, but because of how it was passed to you. Your master once taught you the balm for burns by letting you burn yourself. Not badly, just enough to learn. You made the balm, applied it, and wrote in the book. Do not test recipes on your own wrist unless your pride can take the sting. You pass this knowledge on. Your apprentice has started adding notes now, carefully. With dotted lines and neat lettering and little hearts in the margins she thinks you don't notice. You notice. She recently added a syrup made from orange peel and rosemary that shouldn't work, but does. It helped an old woman find her voice again after a winter-long silence. The woman came back just to say thank you, and then asked for more. You think about this as you turn to the last page. Still blank, still waiting. You dip your pen, write slowly. Child fever, rain, elderflower, still breathing. Don't forget the vinegar cloth. Below it, in smaller letters, apprentice ready, probably, will test with mint labeling. You pause, look at your hands, smell the ink, hear the faint creak of the shop settling around you like an old friend. Then you add one final note before closing the book for the night. We're all still learning and still here. You tie the cord around the cover, place the book gently back on its shelf, between the dried rosemary and the jar of buttons no one has touched in 30 years, but which you can't bring yourself to throw away. The candle gutters once, then steadies. You exhale. You're part of something older than yourself now. Not a title, not a guild, a line of hands, a thread of care, a chain of scribbled notes passed from the cautious to the curious to the quiet. You whisper goodnight to the book, and mean it. The fair is tomorrow. You can already feel it in the air, the churn of carts on cobblestone, the anxious energy of too many guild apprentices, polishing their boots with vinegar, and the soft dread that only comes from knowing you'll be judged, not by patients, but by inspectors. You open the shutters early. The light is cruel and honest. Every jar seems to reveal its dust. Every shelf leans just a bit more than you remembered. The cat glances at the activity, then retreats to her basket. She's seen this show before. Tomorrow the annual fair and guild inspection will take place in the square. It's both a celebration and a bureaucratic ambush. Merchants will line the streets selling sugared almonds and boiled plums. Children will race with ribbons tied to their wrists, and in one very solemn corner you and your fellow apothecaries will arrange your jars on linen-covered tables and pray no one notices the faded labels. Your apprentice is already fussing with your best bottles. She's chosen a deep blue for the cough tonic, pale green for the calming syrup, and a jar shaped like a walnut for the indigestion remedy, because it's poetic. She's also reorganized the sign to read Gentle Medicine's Honest Hands. You nod, approve, and then quietly add a second sign beneath it. No refunds after ingestion. You spend the rest of the morning preparing your display. Each jar must be Clean or convincingly antique, clearly labeled in Latin and French because the guild is picky and multilingual. Pleasantly scented, a trick, you tuck dried orange peels into the baskets. Slightly exotic, you dust the mandrake root and set it on a velvet square. It's just horseradish, but no one needs to know. You review your paperwork licenses, your sworn oath copy written in the driest possible Latin, and a tiny certificate that reads, "Approved Tinctures Vendor, Regional Authority, Year of the Goose." You're not sure what year that is, but the stamp looks official. There's one jar you debate bringing, a balm labeled Trial Number 14 for nerves and needle folk. It's not technically approved. It's a blend of lemon balm, clove ground, fennel seed, and a tiny amount of something you can no longer remember adding. It smells like old letters and lemon peel. You bring it anyway. Your competitors will be there, of course, including the apothecary across the street, Bertrand, self-proclaimed expert in saffron-based everything. He once sold a jar of red wine and thyme as a universal elixir. He's also been known to flirt with inspectors when his scales don't balance. You'd find him annoying if he wasn't occasionally correct. Still, the guild expects clean tables, tidy robes, and respectful nods. You iron your apron with a hot stone. You tie your hair back with the green ribbon, the one that makes you look slightly more like a person who owns a pestle worth inspecting. The inspection is supposed to be about safety. In theory, they'll test your tinctures for purity, check your scales for accuracy, and review your records for signs of fraud. In practice, they mostly judge your handwriting and how likely you are to embarrass the guild. Last year, one apothecary failed for bottling in reused ink pots. You bring brand new flasks this time. Washed, wax sealed, slightly frosted to give the illusion of mystical condensation. You place them next to a bunch of dried mugwort which no one buys but everyone assumes is important. You even prepare a small demonstration jar. Inside, nothing but honey, a floating lemon peel, and a single drop of gold-tinted oil. It does absolutely nothing, but it looks effective. The night before the fair, you sit with your apprentice going over every jar. She tests you. What's in the calming syrup? Lemon balm, mint honey, a whisper of lavender. And what's in the calming wine? A lie. She grins. You both laugh, quietly, a little nervous. You light a candle. Go over your ledger one last time. Check the pouch of coin for bribes, guild donations, as they're formally called. You sigh. Then you go to the shelf marked experimental. There's always the chance the inspector will poke into it. And if he does, you want it to look charming, not concerning. You move the frog and oil jar to the back. Bring the lemon balm lollipops forward. Dust the bottle labeled Memory Oil Unproven and leave it uncorked. It smells like nutmeg and honesty. You think about the purpose of it all, not the display, not the fair, but the inspection itself. Why are you proving your knowledge to men who haven't mixed a poultice in years? You look at your apprentice who's gently labeling a jar with her best handwriting. Right, it's not for them. It's to keep the doors open, to keep the shelves full, the shutters unboarded, and the people coming in not just for cure but for comfort. It's to say, I belong here. I know what I'm doing. Let me keep doing it. You write in your ledger. Fair tomorrow, table prepared, apprentice confident, mandrake polished. If all else fails, smile and speak in Latin. You close the book, blow out the candle. Tomorrow you'll stand behind a table in a linen apron surrounded by jars that glint like promises. And if the inspector tries to catch you off guard, well, you've got a walnut-shaped jar that smells like poetry and a face that says, I dare you. You arrive early, just as the mist is lifting off the square, and the last of the vendors are still muttering at their carts. The fair smells like cinnamon coal smoke and ambition. Children run past with sticky fingers. Minstrels are already tuning their lutes, with all the professionalism of cats screaming at windows. A juggler drops an egg. Somewhere a man selling hot eels yells about their medicinal properties. You nod respectfully. You find your assigned table in the guild quarter, a rectangle of linen stretched tight across a borrowed trestle. The fabric is slightly stained. You flip it. Perfection. Your apprentice arrives not long after balancing 2 crates and chewing on a bit of dried plum. Her sleeves are rolled up. Her eyebrows are furrowed in a way that says she's already reorganizing your display in her head. You let her. This is her first guild showing and you're curious to see what she'll do. She starts with the calming syrup center stage. Clear glass ribbon tied labeled in both Latin and French, with an elegant curl to the lettering. Then the herbal balm laid beside a small dish for testers. She's even brought sprigs of fresh mint to tuck around the display. Sensory marketing, she says. You've taught her well, or she taught herself and you just didn't stop her. Same result. To your left, Bertrand has arrived. His table is covered in saffron-colored cloth embroidered with tiny gold stitches that scream, "I've never mixed a tonic in my life, but I do know a bishop." He set out 5 jars, just 5, each one more decorative than useful. His labels are etched into thin wood. His smile is weaponized. He nods at you. You nod back. Let the games begin. The inspectors arrive just past midday. Robes, clean expressions, neutral parchment in one hand and a well-chewed quill in the other. They move slowly like predators, disguised as administrators. They start at the far end. You watch them sample a bitter root tincture from a man who looks like he hasn't slept in a week. They make a note. Whisper, "Move on." Your stomach flutters, not fear, not pride, just anticipation. You know what's in your jars, but you don't know what's in theirs. The first inspector reaches your table, older, hair like snow, eyes like melted iron. He picks up your syrup, sniffs, nods, dips a wooden spoon in the balm, smears a bit on his wrist, says nothing. Then, what's the binder? Beeswax and pine resin, you answer. Low ratio, won't clog pores. He grunts, writes something down. The second inspector is younger, curious, asks questions, too many, but he smiles at your apprentice's rosemary tonic, and she lights up like a torch. He tries it, nods. Sharp, he says, like good vinegar and bad decisions. You approve of the man immediately. They move on. And just like that, it's over. No fanfare, no certificates, just a nod, a mark, and the knowledge that your license survives another year. You exhale. And then the customers come. Real people with real ailments, real coins and real needs. A soldier with stiff joints buys 2 jars of your warming balm. A mother with a fretful baby buys a sachet of lavender and fennel seed. A girl with ink-stained fingers buys a clarity syrup and blushes when your apprentice smiles at her. Bertrand sells nothing for 2 hours, then makes a scene by waving around a bottle of noble elixir. You suspect it's mostly sugar water and flattery. It works. A merchant's wife buys 4. You don't mind. You sell 15. Midway through the afternoon, a small boy approaches, dragging his father by the hand. She said this one helps with sadness, he says, pointing at a jar of rose honey. The father looks startled. You nod. It doesn't fix everything you say, but it sweetens the waiting. He pays, quietly, takes the boy's hand again and leaves. You'll remember that one. You write it down later. Rose honey, good for sadness and for sons who notice. Your apprentice spends her profits on a ribbon, 2 oat cakes, and a bottle of ink she insists smells like victory. You let her. As the fare winds down, you pack slowly. The jars are lighter, the purse is heavier, the tablecloth is stained with something that smells like apple wine and regret. Bertrand passes by, still grinning. You'll never win the guild's favor with herbs alone, he says. You smile back. I'm not trying to win favor, you reply. I'm trying to keep people breathing. He opens his mouth to respond, then seems to think better of it. He walks away. Your apprentice nudges you. Did we pass? She asks. You pretend to check the ledger, then say, barely, but no one fainted. So that's a win. She grins, tucks her ribbon into her pocket like a prize. Back at the shop, you hang the apron, reshelve the unsold jars, and light a taper for the ledger. You write. Fair, successful. Apprentice proud. Inspector did not notice jar of experimental mood syrup. Mint still sells best. Bertrand's beard looks fake. You sit with your tea cold now, but sweet, and watch the candle flicker in its little glass. Outside the streets echo with fair music. Inside everything smells like rosemary and quiet. You sleep like a stone that night. No dreams, just warmth. The soft creak of the rafters, the distant clink of bottles settling in the dark, the comforting knowledge that the shop is still standing, your license is still valid, and your apprentice didn't accidentally sell the mandrake root as a cooking spice. When morning comes, it's the soft, light kind, the kind that slides across the floor like it's afraid to wake anyone. You stretch, groan, and reach instinctively for your robe. It smells like mint. You smile. You descend the ladder into the shop and pause, because something's changed. The shop is still. Not quiet, there's always some background rustle, the whisper of dried herbs swaying in a draft, the faint squeak of a rat who thinks you don't hear him. But there's a stillness, like the room is holding its breath. Your apprentice is already up, sitting by the workbench, writing something carefully in the personal ledger. She doesn't notice you at first. She's biting her lip, brow furrowed, the quill hovering just above the page. You don't interrupt. When she sees you, she smiles and without a word moves aside to let you sit. You don't read what she's written? Not yet. Instead, you run your fingers across the table. It's been cleaned. The mortars are stacked. The jars are full. The apothecary is ready. She clears her throat. There's someone waiting, she says. You blink. This early? She nods. A man with a cough says he heard about the syrup from a woman with a sick horse and a fondness for orange peel. You laugh. Of course. You rise, smooth your apron, check your hair, your breath, your boots. You take your place behind the counter. You don't do it for praise, or for coin, or for some legacy carved in stone. You do it because someone is always coughing, someone is always aching, someone is always wondering if there's a jar, a leaf, a powder that can make the worst thing in their chest feel a little less heavy. You do it because the world is too large and too cruel and too wet, and sometimes the only thing that helps is a warm jar wrapped in cloth and handed over by someone who doesn't flinch when you describe your symptoms. You do it because you remember being 13 and terrified and amazed at how rosemary smelled when crushed with honey. You do it because no one else will. Not like this. Not with this gentleness. Not with this much care for the line between truth and belief. You open the door. The man coughs. You gesture to the stool. He sits. You begin. As the hours pass, the shop fills again. Old faces, new faces. Someone returning for the balm you said might help their knees. Someone else just wanting to browse. The cat knocks over a flask. You don't scold her. You sell 6 jars of calming syrup, 3 herbal tooth powders, a tiny bottle of rose oil that smells like impossible mornings and things unsaid. You eat lunch standing up, bread and salted plums and a few almonds from the fair. Your apprentice helps a woman with a baby who won't sleep. She offers a sachet of lavender and lemon balm and a warm cloth to wrap it in. You don't interrupt. The woman cries, not loudly, just enough to shake. Your apprentice puts a hand on her shoulder and stays silent. You don't interrupt. By evening, your knees ache. Your fingers are stained from crushed mint. You smell like vinegar and smoke. You feel peaceful. As the last customer leaves, you light a final taper and sit by the window with your tea. You open the ledger. Your apprentice has written, "He taught me to measure with my eyes and trust my hands. Today I gave comfort. I think it worked. I hope I remember everything, especially how to listen." You close the book gently. And write. You will. Then you lean back and let the quiet hold you. And now it's time to sleep. Let the shop close softly behind your eyes. Let the jars quiet themselves. Let the scents of thyme and honey and old paper drift away like steam from a just cooled cup. Feel your shoulders loosen. Feel the floor beneath your feet become distant like a memory. Let the worries of the day, spilled vinegar, mislabeled jars, or impossible customers fold themselves into nothing. You've done enough. You've mixed the syrups. You've steeped the teas. You've listened to the unspoken aches and handed over jars with ribbon and understanding. You've remembered the names, the symptoms, the quiet. The shutters are latched. The ledger is closed. The fire has faded to soft red coals, warm enough to hold off the chill, soft enough not to disturb your sleep. There is no more you need to do tonight. Let the wind tap gently at the glass like an old friend passing by. Let the air smell faintly of dried sage and lemon peel. Let the night carry you. You are the apothecary. You are the one who stayed, who listened, who helped even when it was just a cup of tea and a warm place to sit. Now let the apothecary rest too. Let your breath slow. Let the silence bloom. Let the dark wrap around you like a warm, well-worn cloak. And if the night brings dreams, may they be soft. May they smell of rosemary and mint. May they be filled with jars that never spill and doors that always open gently. You are safe. You are still. You are home. End of script. Sweet dreams.